CEO mocked Maid's daughter. Fix this helicopter, and I'll give you $100 million. She did. He was shocked. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's unbelievable story. Lily had always been invisible. For her, that was the rule. As the daughter of a maid, she was taught from a very young age to stay out of sight, to blend in with the background, and to never draw attention to herself. Her mother, Abigail, worked tirelessly as a maid in the sprawling mansion of a powerful CEO, Mr. Harrison Thorne. The mansion, located on a hill with views of the entire city, was a place of luxury and wealth, where every inch of the home sparkled with the finest decor. But for Lily, it was just a place where she felt small and out of place, always in the shadow of the towering figures of the rich and powerful who walked its halls. One day, while cleaning the glass windows of the mansion, she overheard a conversation between Mr. Thorne and his team of engineers. They were having trouble with a new helicopter prototype, something Mr. Thorne had invested millions of dollars in. The engineers were frustrated, their faces etched with exhaustion, as they discussed how the machine simply would not start, no matter what they tried. Mr. Thorne, in his usual condescending tone, mocked his team. He stood at the center of the room, arms crossed, looking down at the engineers. I might as well ask the maid's daughter to fix this, he said with a laugh. Maybe she can solve it. If she does, I'll give her $100 million. The room erupted in laughter, the sound echoing off the marble floors and high ceilings. But Lily, who had been silently listening from the corner, wasn't amused. She knew the exact model of the helicopter, having overheard her mother and the engineers discussing its mechanics before. Without thinking, she walked over to the team, her heart pounding in her chest, and asked, "Could I take a look at it?" The room fell silent, the laughter dying in an instant. Mr. Thorne turned to her, raising an eyebrow in disbelief. "You? Fix the helicopter?" he sneered. The engineers exchanged confused looks, but Lily wasn't deterred. She approached the helicopter and began inspecting the engine. She noticed a few overlooked issues that the engineers had missed, and within minutes, she found the problem, a malfunctioning power regulator. As she worked, Mr. Thorne and his team watched in stunned silence. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Lily, the maid's daughter, had a precision and knowledge that far exceeded anyone in the room. She carefully made the necessary repairs, her hands steady and confident. And then, with a final push of a button, the helicopter roared to life, its engines humming smoothly. The room was dead silent. No one could believe it. Mr. Thorne's expression went from disbelief to shock as he realized what had just happened. The maid's daughter, the one he had mocked and belittled, had just done the impossible. He stood there, speechless, as Lily looked up at him. Her hands were dirty, but her face was calm. She had proven herself in front of the very people who had doubted her. It was a moment of triumph, not just for Lily, but for anyone who had ever been underestimated. Ivy Thorne, Mr. Thorne's daughter, had been watching the entire exchange with growing disbelief. She had known Lily for years, but had never seen her act like this before. Her father, the man who controlled billions, had just been completely and utterly outclassed by a young girl who had nothing but the knowledge from her own observations. Ivy couldn't believe it. She had been surrounded by experts her whole life, men and women with degrees from the best universities, yet none of them had managed to solve the problem like Lily did in mere minutes. She had watched her father mock the young girl, not knowing the depth of her skill. The situation had shaken Ivy to her core. She felt a deep sense of unease. Lily had proven her worth in a way no one expected, and now, standing there with the helicopter running, the room fell into an awkward silence. Ivy's curiosity got the best of her. She approached Lily, her steps soft against the marble floor. "How did you do that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lily looked up at Ivy, surprised by the question but not at all hesitant. "It's all in the details," Lily said simply, her gaze steady. The engineers missed something small, something obvious. They were so focused on the bigger picture, they didn't see it. Ivy couldn't help but feel a pang of respect for the maid's daughter. She had never expected Lily to be so perceptive, so intelligent. She had always viewed her as nothing more than a maid's child, someone who didn't belong in the world of luxury and power Ivy was so used to. But now, that view was rapidly changing. She watched as her father, Mr. Thorne, walked towards Lily, his expression still a mix of disbelief and anger. He couldn't deny that the helicopter was working, that Lily had succeeded where his entire team had failed. The silence in the room grew heavier, and Ivy could see the wheels turning in her father's mind. "Well, what now?" he finally muttered, his voice strained. "What do we do about this?" Lily remained calm, unaffected by the tension in the room. "I think you owe me something," she said, her voice steady, yet firm. Her words hung in the air, sharp and clear. Mr. Thorne's face turned red with anger. He didn't like being challenged, especially not by someone he had so blatantly mocked. "You think just because you fixed a helicopter you're entitled to my money?" he snapped. But something in Lily's eyes made him pause. There was a quiet confidence in her, a strength he hadn't expected. It was as though she knew exactly what was at stake, and she wasn't afraid to claim what she was owed. Ivy watched the exchange unfold, her mind racing. She couldn't help but feel a sense of justice in Lily's words, a sense that for the first time, the balance of power had shifted. Her father was no longer the unquestioned authority in the room. The people he had always looked down upon had proven that they were more than what he assumed. It was a harsh, yet undeniable reality. "Give her the money," Ivy said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. All eyes turned to her, shocked by her words. "What?" Mr. Thorne asked, incredulous. "She deserves it. She fixed your helicopter. She deserves the recognition and the reward." There was a long pause. No one moved. The silence in the room was deafening. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mr. Thorne turned to Lily and begrudgingly nodded. "Fine. You'll get the money. But don't think for a second this changes anything," he said coldly. Lily didn't respond. She had won the battle, and she knew it. The power dynamics in the room had shifted. For once, the rich and powerful had to acknowledge someone they had tried so hard to ignore. She walked out of the room, not as the maid's daughter, but as someone who had earned her place in a world that had never given her a chance. Ivy couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in the room. She had watched Lily walk out of the mansion with a confidence that was now undeniable. For the first time, Ivy wasn't just witnessing power dynamics in her world, she was feeling them shift. Lily, the maid's daughter, had turned the tables, proving that true value wasn't just about wealth or status. Ivy's respect for Lily had grown, but so had her curiosity. She needed to understand more about the girl who had humbled her father in front of everyone. Over the next few days, Ivy sought out Lily. It was strange for Ivy to feel drawn to someone who had been in the shadows of her life for so long, but she couldn't ignore the nagging question in her mind. How could someone so unassuming be so brilliant? One afternoon, Ivy found Lily in the garden, quietly tending to the flowers. Her hands were delicate as she worked, carefully trimming the leaves and arranging the petals. Ivy hesitated for a moment before approaching. "Lily," Ivy called softly. The girl looked up, her eyes warm but cautious. "Yes, Miss Thorne." Ivy paused, feeling the awkwardness in the air. She wasn't used to speaking to someone like this, someone who had been beneath her, but now she realized how wrong she had been. "You've always been here, haven't you?" Ivy began, trying to find the right words. "I mean, you've always worked for us in the background. But you're more than that, aren't you?" Lily set the pruning shears down and looked up at Ivy, her face unreadable for a moment. Then she nodded slowly. "I suppose I am." Ivy felt a strange connection between them, despite their difference in status. "How did you learn all of that?" Ivy asked. "The helicopter, the way you fixed it? How did you know so much?" Lily smiled softly, looking down at the flowers she had been tending to. "It wasn't so much about knowing everything," she replied. "It was about paying attention. I've watched people for years. I've learned from them. You'd be surprised what you can pick up when you're invisible." Ivy's heart fluttered with a mixture of admiration and shame. She had always assumed Lily's life was simple, that she was just another maid's child. She had never thought of her as someone with real potential, someone who could change the course of an entire situation with just her knowledge. "I never realized," Ivy whispered, more to herself than to Lily. "I never realized how much I was missing." For the first time in her life, Ivy was beginning to see the world through a different lens. She had always lived in a bubble, surrounded by wealth and power, never questioning the inequalities that existed. But now, with Lily standing before her, she felt the cracks in that bubble, the reality of the world she had been so blind to. You should never underestimate anyone, Lily continued, her voice gentle but firm. Not based on what they have, or who they are. Everyone has something to offer, something unique. You just have to be willing to see it. Ivy stood there in silence for a moment, taking in Lily's words. She felt the weight of the moment, the shift in her perspective. Maybe this was the beginning of something new, something that would change both of their lives forever. As Ivy looked at Lily, she realized that the world wasn't divided by the wealth you had or the family you were born into. It was about what you brought to the table, and Lily had brought something that no amount of money could buy. The ability to see the world for what it truly was. In that moment, Ivy made a promise to herself. She would no longer look down on people like Lily. She would learn to see the value in everyone, no matter where they came from. And she would make sure her father saw that too. Ivy's life continued to shift in ways she hadn't expected. Since her conversation with Lily, her perspective on everything had been altered. She found herself questioning everything she had once taken for granted. Her father's business practices, the way she had viewed the staff, even her own future. She began to see her father's empire in a different light, one that wasn't just built on the backs of the rich and powerful, but also on the work of people like Lily, who had been overlooked for far too long. Mr. Thorne, however, remained unchanged. His pride had been wounded, but he was too stubborn to admit it. He couldn't understand why Lily's small victory had made such an impact. To him, it was just a helicopter, just a small moment of embarrassment. But Ivy knew better. She knew this was a turning point, not just for her father, but for herself as well. She began to spend more time with Lily, learning about the things she had never known. Lily taught her how to listen to people, how to observe, and how to value the small details. It wasn't about having the most expensive education or the fanciest job title. It was about seeing things others missed, understanding the intricacies of the world around you, and using that knowledge to make a difference. The more Ivy learned, the more she realized how much she had to change. She had been living in a bubble, shielded from the struggles that many people faced. But now, with Lily's help, she was beginning to see the world from a different perspective. As the days passed, Ivy found herself speaking up more, standing up for people who had been overlooked or mistreated. Her father noticed, of course, and he wasn't pleased. He didn't understand why his daughter, the heir to his fortune, was suddenly so concerned with the lives of the help. Ivy, you're better than this, he would say. Why are you wasting your time with people like them? But Ivy no longer saw things the way she once did. She had seen the value in Lily, in the people her father had dismissed as unimportant, and she couldn't ignore it anymore. One day, her father called her into his office. I don't know what's gotten into you, he said, his voice cold. But I don't like it. You're starting to act like one of them. Ivy stood her ground. Maybe that's exactly what I need to do, she said. Maybe it's time I stop living in your world and start living in the real one. Mr. Thorne's face reddened. He was angry, but Ivy could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. For the first time, he was seeing his daughter in a way he never had before. She wasn't just a young woman who would inherit his wealth. She was someone with her own ideas, her own values. And those values didn't align with his. You're making a big mistake, he muttered, turning away from her. Ivy left his office feeling more determined than ever. She had come to a crossroads in her life. She could stay in her father's world, continue living the life of privilege and comfort, or she could step out into the real world, where people like Lily had made a difference with their knowledge, their heart, and their courage. Ivy wasn't sure what the future would hold, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to follow in her father's footsteps anymore. She was going to make her own path, one that valued people for who they were, not for the wealth they had or the titles they held. And as she thought about Lily, Ivy realized that the real power wasn't in money or status. It was in the ability to change the world by helping others. It was a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Ivy had made up her mind. Despite the tension in the Thorne mansion and her father's growing frustration, she couldn't turn back now. The way Lily had impacted her life wasn't something she could ignore. Every conversation she had with her father, every moment she spent in the mansion, felt increasingly like a choice between following the life laid out for her or forging her own path. The weight of that decision grew heavier with each passing day. As Ivy started making her own decisions, she realized that not everyone would agree with her. Her father, still stubborn in his ways, had become more distant. His expectations for her to follow in his footsteps remained, but she was no longer interested in being a figurehead for his empire. She wanted something more, something real. Ivy began to stand her ground. She started by speaking out in meetings, bringing up ideas that were once dismissed by her father and his colleagues. She suggested more sustainable business practices, better treatment for the workers, and even fair wages for those like Lily. But every time she spoke, she could feel the room fall silent. The people who had once been her father's loyal followers looked at her with skepticism, their faces questioning her motives. Her father was no exception. One evening, after a particularly heated conversation in one of their board meetings, he pulled Ivy aside. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice low and controlled, though the anger beneath it was clear. "You're making a mockery of everything we've worked for. You want to help those people?" He motioned vaguely toward the employees, the staff who had always been beneath their world. "They're beneath us, Ivy. You've forgotten that." Ivy took a deep breath, fighting the urge to back down. "No, father. I haven't forgotten. I'm just starting to see things clearly. These people, these workers, the ones who clean our floors, serve our food, take care of the things we take for granted, they have value. And it's time we start recognizing that." "You're wrong," he snapped, his frustration palpable. "This is business, not charity. You can't fix the world by treating everyone equally. It's not practical." Ivy met her father's eyes. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of him. "No, father. What's not practical is ignoring the people who make this empire possible. You don't have to do everything for them, but at least give them respect." The room fell silent again. This time, it wasn't just because of Ivy's words. It was because her father, the great Harrison Thorne, had no response. For the first time, he was at a loss. But Ivy wasn't finished. She had seen too much, learned too much, to back down now. "I've made my decision," she continued, her voice firm. "I'm not going to follow in your footsteps. I'm going to make my own. And if that means standing up for people like Lily, then I will." Her father's face was a mixture of anger and disbelief. He was silent for a long moment before he spoke. "Then you're no longer a part of this company," he said coldly. "You're on your own now." Those words stung more than Ivy had expected, but they also freed her. She wasn't going to let her father's empire define her anymore. She knew what she had to do. Ivy walked out of the mansion that night with her head held high. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she was ready to face it. And as she walked away, she realized something. The world wasn't divided by the wealth you had or the title you carried. It was about the difference you made, and Ivy was determined to make a difference. The next day, Ivy went to see Lily. The girl who had once been invisible had become the catalyst for Ivy's transformation, and Ivy knew she needed her by her side. "I'm going to change things," Ivy told Lily. "And I need your help." Lily, who had always kept a low profile, looked up at Ivy with a knowing smile. "I thought you'd never ask." Ivy stood before the vast windows of her office, looking out over the sprawling city below. The weight of her father's words still echoed in her mind, but she was resolute. She had walked away from the empire her father had built, but she wasn't walking away from her purpose. She knew she had to make a difference, and the decision was now in her hands. The next step was crucial. Ivy had spent days reflecting on how to move forward. She had the resources, the connections, and now the courage to do something meaningful. But she needed a plan. Her conversation with Lily had been the turning point. She was no longer just a rich heir with no real direction. She was a woman ready to challenge the status quo. Ivy invited Lily to meet her at the mansion. They sat together in the same room where Ivy had once felt trapped, now filled with possibilities. Ivy looked at Lily, a sense of gratitude and determination in her eyes. "I want to create something that truly values people, not for their status or wealth, but for their contributions and their potential. We can build something that recognizes the workers, the ones who've been overlooked for too long." Lily, who had always kept to the background, listened intently. She had always been a quiet observer, but now she could see the fire in Ivy's eyes, the drive that had once been buried under privilege and expectations. "We can do this," Lily said, her voice soft but confident. "We can build something real." Together, they began to brainstorm a vision. Ivy wanted to create a business that focused on providing opportunities for those who had been ignored, starting with the workers in the industry her father had thrived in. They would create a company that not only treated employees well but empowered them, that provided training, fair wages, and a path to growth. It was an ambitious plan, but Ivy knew that it was the right one. As they began making plans, Ivy's determination grew stronger. She could see the future unfolding, a future where people were valued for their abilities, not their titles. She reached out to a few trusted colleagues, people who had always been loyal to her father's empire, and slowly built a team who shared her vision. They began small, launching a pilot project focused on creating better work environments for those who had been marginalized. The early days were tough. There were setbacks, moments when it felt like they weren't making enough progress. But Ivy and Lily refused to give up. Their passion fueled them, and they knew that change was possible. As the project gained momentum, Ivy's father started to take notice. He hadn't expected his daughter to build something that challenged everything he stood for. But as the company's reputation grew, so did the pressure. People began to ask questions. Ivy's decision to leave the Thorn Empire wasn't just a personal choice anymore. It was shaking the foundation of everything her father had worked for. One afternoon, as Ivy sat in a meeting with the new team, she got a call from her father. He had requested a meeting. Ivy knew it was coming. Her father had never been one to back down from a challenge, and now that Ivy had created something successful, he wanted to see if she would return to the fold. Ivy agreed to meet him, but she was prepared. She knew her place in this new world was not with him, not in the company that had always been built on a hierarchy that kept people like Lily at the bottom. As she sat across from her father in his luxurious office, Ivy felt the weight of their past conversations, the tension between them now palpable. "You've done well," her father said, his voice tinged with an unusual level of respect. "But you've made a mistake. You're going against everything I've built. This world is about power. It's about who controls the resources." Ivy met his gaze, unwavering. "No, father. It's about recognizing the people who make the resources possible. It's about building something that lasts because it's built on fairness, respect, and real value." Her father didn't respond. There was a moment of silence between them, and Ivy knew that, in that moment, they were no longer on the same side. "I'm not coming back," Ivy said quietly. "This is my path now." As Ivy left her father's office, a sense of peace settled over her. She knew this was just the beginning, but for the first time in her life, she felt certain that she was on the right path. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Lily by her side and her newfound purpose, Ivy knew she was ready to take on whatever came next. Ivy's decision was final, but the journey ahead wasn't going to be easy. As the days passed, her small company continued to grow, attracting attention and, more importantly, making waves. Ivy had created a new kind of business, one that prioritized the well-being of its workers, fair wages, and equal opportunities for everyone, regardless of their background. But as her success began to ripple through the industry, it wasn't long before the old guard took notice, and not in a supportive way. The whispers started slowly, but Ivy could hear them. Her father, ever the powerful businessman, was determined to regain control, and he wasn't going to let his daughter's new venture stand in the way. Ivy had anticipated this. She knew her father would not let go of his empire so easily, and he had made it clear that he was prepared to fight to keep his vision intact. Ivy was about to face the real challenge of her life. Her father was using all the influence he had to undermine her business. He made calls to potential investors, casting doubt on Ivy's company, spreading rumors about its viability. The pressure mounted, and for the first time, Ivy began to feel the weight of her choices. She spent sleepless nights wondering if she had made a mistake, but then she thought about Lily. She thought about all the workers who were relying on her. Ivy couldn't give up now. She had come too far, and the foundation she was building was too important. It was during one of these sleepless nights that Ivy received an unexpected visitor. Lily had arrived at the office, a determined look in her eyes. "You're thinking too much," Lily said, her voice calm but strong. "You've built something worth fighting for. Don't let him break you." Ivy looked at her, a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion in her gaze. "I'm trying, but it feels like every step forward is met with resistance. My father won't stop. He wants to crush this, and he has the power to do it." Lily shook her head. "You have something he doesn't. You have people who believe in you. You've built a community," Ivy. People don't follow you because you have money or power. They follow you because they believe in what you're doing. That's your strength. Ivy took a deep breath, letting the weight of Lily's words sink in. It was true. She had built something more than just a business. She had built trust, loyalty, and a sense of purpose. Her company wasn't just about profits. It was about changing lives. That realization lit a fire within her. The next morning, Ivy gathered her team. It was time to fight back. She couldn't do it alone, and she wasn't going to. Together, they devised a plan. They would stand firm, continue to operate with integrity, and show the world that their business was built on more than just the pursuit of wealth. Ivy wasn't going to let her father's influence crush what she had worked so hard to create. She knew the road ahead would be tough, but she also knew that she wasn't alone. She had her team, and she had Lily, two people who had never doubted her. The battle had only just begun, but Ivy was ready. She was no longer just the daughter of a billionaire. She was the founder of something real, something that had the power to change the world. And no one, not even her father, was going to take that from her. Ivy's resolve was stronger than ever as the battle with her father intensified. He had underestimated her, believing that his wealth and influence would be enough to crush her dream. But what he didn't understand was that she was no longer the naive daughter trying to follow in his footsteps. She was now a woman with her own vision, her own purpose. As her father continued to apply pressure, Ivy refused to back down. She stood tall, determined to prove that her company wasn't just a fluke. It was a movement, and she had built it on the belief that true success came from fairness, equality, and hard work. The media soon caught wind of the growing tension between Ivy and her father. The press, once enamored with the Thorne empire, now turned their attention to Ivy and her new business. Stories spread about her fight for a fair workplace and the way she was challenging the very system that had supported her family for generations. It was a David and Goliath story, and Ivy was determined to be David. Despite the challenges, Ivy's company began to thrive. Her employees, the very people her father had once looked down upon, were now her greatest supporters. They worked tirelessly to ensure that the company grew and succeeded, and Ivy made sure they were rewarded for their efforts. The word spread, and soon, more people wanted to join the movement. Ivy wasn't just offering jobs. She was offering dignity, respect, and the chance to be part of something bigger. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Her father, frustrated by his inability to regain control, began to escalate his attacks. He tried to undermine her at every turn, using his connections to cut off her resources, to sabotage her relationships with potential investors. Yet, with every obstacle he threw at her, Ivy became more determined. She couldn't afford to lose now, not after everything she had worked for. One day, Ivy received a call from one of her top investors. The news wasn't good. Her father had spread rumors that Ivy's company was unstable, claiming that it was a risky venture that would eventually fail. The investor was pulling out. It was a devastating blow, but Ivy refused to let it break her. Instead of feeling defeated, she saw it as an opportunity to prove her critics wrong. She called a meeting with her team and laid out a plan to raise the capital they needed without relying on her father's influence. They would find new investors, people who believed in their mission and were willing to back them. It was a bold move, but Ivy knew it was the only way forward. Over the next few weeks, Ivy and her team worked tirelessly, pitching their vision to anyone who would listen. Slowly, they began to gain traction. More investors, who weren't swayed by her father's attempts to destroy her, came on board. Ivy's reputation grew, and soon, she had more resources than she had ever dreamed of. One afternoon, as Ivy was walking out of her office, she received an unexpected message from her father. It was short and to the point. "You've won. But remember, you'll never be able to shake off the name Thorne. It will always be attached to you, no matter what you do." For the first time in a long while, Ivy felt a sense of peace. She had fought the battle and won, not by taking the easy road, but by standing up for what she believed in. She had proved that her success wasn't about her family's name, but about her own hard work, vision, and the people who had believed in her. As she read the message, she smiled to herself. Her father had thought he could break her, but Ivy had done something far more powerful. She had built something that would last, a legacy not defined by money or power, but by the people who had helped her get there. She had won, not just for herself, but for all those who had been overlooked, underestimated, and ignored. And that, Ivy realized, was the real victory. Ivy stood at the podium, facing an audience of industry leaders, investors, and employees, her heart racing. The journey she had embarked on, one full of challenges, doubts, and moments of fear, had brought her to this point. Her father had tried everything to tear her down, but she had not only survived, but thrived. The company she had built was now a testament to resilience, to the idea that success could be measured by the impact on people's lives, not just by profit margins. As she began to speak, Ivy could feel the weight of the moment. When I first started this company, I didn't have the backing of the big names, the investors, or even my own family. What I did have was a vision of a company where people mattered, where the workers, the people who are often invisible, are seen, respected, and valued. And today, I stand before you, proud of what we've built together. This company isn't just about making money. It's about creating a future where everyone has a chance to grow, to thrive, and to be treated with the dignity they deserve. The crowd was silent, listening intently. Ivy knew her message wasn't just a sales pitch. It was a declaration of everything she had fought for. The journey had been long, but every sacrifice had been worth it. Behind her, a large screen displayed the company's achievements: new partnerships, fair wages, employee wellness programs, and a growing community of people who were now part of something bigger than just a job. As Ivy paused for a moment, she looked out over the crowd. She could see the faces of people who had supported her from the very beginning. Lily was there too, standing in the back of the room, smiling with pride. Ivy had come a long way since the days of being underestimated. She had built a company that was changing the way people saw business, one step at a time. Her father, once so adamant that only power and money mattered, had faded into the background. The legacy Ivy was creating wasn't defined by his name, but by the impact she had made in the lives of others. Ivy's voice broke through the silence again. This company is proof that it's possible to build a successful business without losing sight of what truly matters. We've created a culture where respect, fairness, and growth are the foundation. And we're just getting started. Together, we will continue to break barriers, to lift people up, and to create a world where everyone has a seat at the table. The room erupted into applause. Ivy stood tall, her heart swelling with pride. She had done it. Not only had she built a business that was thriving, but she had also created a movement that would change the way companies operated, a movement that would put people first. As the applause continued, Ivy caught sight of Lily once more. Their eyes met, and Ivy gave her a small nod. Lily smiled back, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had accomplished together. Ivy knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead was still long, but she had proven that one person could make a difference. Her father had underestimated her, but now Ivy was building a legacy of her own, one that would last for generations to come. In this compelling journey of transformation, a young woman defies her father's expectations and builds a groundbreaking business that challenges traditional views of success. The story explores how a daughter of a maid rises against all odds, proving her worth in a world dominated by wealth and power. As she faces skepticism from her father and the business elite, she gradually builds a company founded on respect, fairness, and equality. The tale unfolds with determination as she earns the trust of her team and creates a movement that changes the lives of countless people. This journey is a shining example of how true success doesn't come from wealth or status, but from the impact one can have on the lives of others. These millionaire stories highlight the power of resilience and the pursuit of justice in the face of adversity. Follow along as this story of personal growth and empowerment reveals the real cost of standing up for what's right. By proving that dignity and hard work matter more than power and privilege, this tale inspires and motivates those who believe that millionaire stories can be written without compromise. Witness a new kind of millionaire story, one built on integrity, hard work, and the drive to create positive change. This is a reminder that even in a world that celebrates wealth, it is the people who stand for what's right who make the real difference. Join us in celebrating these millionaire stories that focus on what truly matters, proving that success is about making a difference, not just making money.